I'm not sure why I remember that winter so clearly. Some memories fade with time, losing their edges, becoming soft and distant. But that Christmas stayed sharp, as if it never truly ended. I was a child then, old enough to walk alone, young enough to believe that the world still followed invisible rules I did not yet understand. We lived near the forest, the kind of forest that looks peaceful during the day and endless at night. In winter, it became something else entirely. Snow covered the ground in thick, quiet layers. The trees stood still, heavy with frost, their branches bending like they were listening. And the silence was deeper than at any other time of year. Even now, decades later, I can close my eyes and return to that place, to the small house at the edge of town, to the dim yellow lights glowing behind frozen windows, to the feeling that something was waiting, not in a threatening way, but in a patient one. People often say that Christmas is a time of warmth and safety, and maybe it is, but there is also something else beneath it. A pause, a stillness, a moment when the world seems to hold its breath. As a child, I felt that pause more strongly than anyone around me. The adults were busy preparing for the holiday. Decorations appeared on doors. Soft music played from radios. Familiar routines repeated themselves year after year. But the forest did not change. It remained dark, silent, watching. We were taught not to go too far into it, especially in winter. Not because of animals, or weather, or getting lost. Those were the reasons adults gave us. But children sensed the truth differently. We knew there was another reason. One no one ever said out loud. That year, the snow began falling earlier than usual. Thick, slow flakes that erased footsteps within minutes. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the forest paths had vanished entirely. I remember standing by my bedroom window that night, looking toward the tree line, the moonlight reflected off the snow, turning the world pale and unreal. The forest looked closer than it ever had before. That was the first time I felt it. The sense that the forest was not just a place, but a presence, and that something important was about to happen. When I think back to that Christmas Eve now, I realize how strange it is that memory works in circles. I remember the night itself, and I remember moments years later that felt connected to it, as if the forest never truly let me go. But at the time, I was just a child, unaware that some experiences do not end when the night is over. Christmas Eve arrived quietly that year. No storm, no wind, just falling snow. Thick, slow, deliberate. Inside the house, everything felt warm and familiar. The smell of food, soft lights on the tree, voices moving gently from room to room. And yet, beneath it all, there was a tension I could not explain. A sense that something was slightly out of place. I remember my father checking the door more than once. My mother standing by the window longer than usual. No one said anything, but the silence between words felt heavier than normal. Outside, the forest was almost completely white. Snow clung to every branch, every trunk, softening their shapes. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. That was when I heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The forest had gone completely still. Years later, when I was studying at university, I would feel that same sensation again. Walking across campus late at night, surrounded by people, yet suddenly aware of a stillness that did not belong there. But on that Christmas Eve, I did not have words for it. I only knew that the world outside the window felt different. I remember putting on my coat without fully realizing why. I remember opening the door and stepping onto the porch, the cold air pressing against my skin. The snow muffled every sound. My footsteps barely existed. The forest seemed closer than it ever had before. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the trees, feeling something pull at my attention. Not strongly, not urgently, but persistently. That same feeling would return years later when I received the first letter. It arrived during my second year at university. No return address, no explanation. Just a few lines written in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. Do you still remember the forest? At the time, I laughed it off. I assumed it was a mistake, a strange coincidence. But standing on the porch that night, as a child, I felt the beginning of that thread, the one that would stretch quietly through my life. Somewhere deep in the trees, a shape shifted. It might have been a branch bending under the weight of snow, or it might have been something else. I never found out. What I do know is that I felt watched, not in fear, but in recognition, as if the forest knew me. I did not step into it that night. I only stood there, listening to the silence, until the cold finally drove me back inside. Later, long after midnight, the first disappearance happened. A neighbor's son, older than me, almost an adult, failed to return home after a short walk. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away. The snow had erased everything. People spoke in hushed voices the next morning. Adults avoided details. Children sensed that something had crossed an invisible line. Years later, sitting in a crowded lecture hall, I would suddenly remember his face, clear and sharp, and realize that I had just passed someone who looked exactly like him. The resemblance was too precise to ignore. I never approached that person. I never asked questions. Some things feel safer when left untouched. That winter passed, but the feeling remained. The forest stayed silent. The town returned to routine. And yet, every Christmas after that, I noticed the same subtle changes. The way snow fell more softly, the way adults grew quieter, the way no one ever spoke of certain paths again. Even now, writing this, I sometimes wonder whether the forest ever truly releases those who notice it, or whether it simply waits. After that winter, the town tried to forget. Forgetting was something it had learned to do well. The boy who vanished was spoken of less and less. His name disappeared from conversations. His family moved away quietly, as if distance could soften the absence. And yet, the forest remained exactly where it had always been. As a child, I began to notice patterns, small details that adults never mentioned. Certain paths that were no longer used, areas where the snow was never disturbed, no matter how tempting they looked. I would ask questions sometimes, simple questions, but answers were vague, carefully shaped to avoid something unspoken. It's just dangerous in winter. People get confused in the cold. The forest is deeper than it looks. None of those explanations ever felt complete. Years passed, childhood faded. I left the town behind to study far away, carrying with me the quiet memory of snow and silence. University life was loud, crowded, full of motion. At first, it felt like a complete break from the past. And yet, the forest followed me there too. It began with dreams. I would find myself walking through snow-covered trees, always at night, always alone. The path never ended, but it never frightened me either. There was a strange comfort in the repetition. I told no one about those dreams. Then came the letters. They arrived sporadically, sometimes months apart, always without a return address. Each one was brief, never more than a few sentences. Some paths do not close. Winter remembers. Have you been listening? I kept them all. I told myself they meant nothing, that they were coincidences, pranks, fragments of imagination. But I noticed something unsettling. The handwriting never changed. Years passed, yet the letters remained exactly the same. Steady, careful, untouched by time. Around that same period, I began seeing familiar faces. Not clearly at first, just impressions. A figure crossing the street, someone sitting alone in a cafe. Faces I recognized, but could not place. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the university library, it became impossible to ignore. I saw him, the boy who had vanished, older than I remembered, yet unchanged in some essential way. His expression was calm, almost distant. Our eyes met briefly. He did not react. He walked past me as if I were a stranger. I stood there for a long time afterward, my breath fogging the cold air, trying to convince myself that memory had played a trick on me. But deep down, I knew it hadn't. I never saw him again. Winter after winter, similar moments repeated themselves. Different faces, different places, always brief, always silent. I began to understand something then. The forest was not confined to one location. It was a pattern, a rhythm. Some people simply stepped out of time. When I returned home years later, older and more cautious, the town looked smaller, quieter. The forest stood exactly as it always had. Snow fell gently as I walked its edge, stopping short of the paths we once avoided. I did not go in. I had learned patience. Another letter arrived that night. "You are still welcome." I never replied. Some invitations are not meant to be answered. And yet, every Christmas Eve, no matter where I am, I feel it. The pause, the stillness, the moment when the world seems to wait. The forest stretches endlessly before me, not as a place, but as a memory that never truly fades, waiting. As I grew older, I began to understand that silence can be deliberate, that sometimes what is not said carries more meaning than what is spoken aloud. In our town, there were many such silences. After the first disappearance, there were others, spread across years, never close enough together to feel like a pattern. A hiker who failed to return, a teenager who took a familiar shortcut and was never seen again, a man who stepped outside one winter evening and simply did not come back. Each time, the same response followed. Searches, questions, explanations that never fully explained anything. And then, slowly, life moved on. As a child, I sensed the weight behind those pauses, the way conversations stopped when someone entered the room, the way certain names were avoided entirely. I noticed how adults never walked alone near the forest at night, how they checked windows during snowfall, how Christmas Eve gatherings ended earlier than they used to. No one told us stories about it, no warnings, no myths, and yet everyone seemed to know. Years later, during my studies, I found myself drawn to books that spoke of similar things, old accounts, folklore, stories that existed on the edges of history, forests where people vanished without trace, places where time seemed inconsistent, moments when reality softened, allowing something else to pass through. The details differed, but the feeling was always the same. A stillness, a pause, a sense of being observed, not with malice, but with attention. I began to wonder whether our town was unique at all, or whether it was simply one of many places where the world thins slightly, just enough for something to cross. One winter, long after I had left home, I returned to visit an old teacher. He had aged considerably, yet his memory remained sharp. We spoke about ordinary things at first, weather, books, the passing of time. Eventually, without planning to, I mentioned the forest. His expression changed, not dramatically, but noticeably. Some places, he said carefully, are not meant to be understood. I asked him if he believed the disappearances were accidents. He paused for a long time before answering. I believe, he said, the people notice more than they admit, and some notice too much. He said nothing more. That night, I dreamed again of snow-covered paths, of walking without destination, of a forest that felt endless but strangely familiar. When I woke, I felt calm, not relieved, not afraid, calm. Over the years, I noticed that the letters stopped arriving. Not suddenly, they simply became less frequent until they ceased entirely. In their absence, something else remained, a sense of connection. Whenever winter came, no matter where I lived, I felt the same subtle shift, the same quiet anticipation, as if the world was preparing for something invisible. Christmas Eve always carried that feeling most strongly. The world slowed, sound softened, time stretched. I began to wonder whether the forest existed, not to take, but to keep. Not as a threat, but as a threshold. Perhaps those who disappeared were not lost at all. Perhaps they had simply stepped somewhere we could not follow. This thought did not frighten me. It comforted me, because it suggested that the world was larger than we believed, that existence extended beyond our limited understanding, and that some mysteries were not tragedies, but transitions. As years passed, my own life settled into routine, work, relationships, quiet evenings, and yet the memory of that forest remained unchanged, waiting, patient, unmoved by time. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine walking those paths again, not as a child, but as someone who understands the weight of moments. I imagine the snow falling softly, the trees standing still, the silence pressing gently against the world. And I wonder, not with fear, but with quiet curiosity, whether some places remember us long after we believe we have left them behind. There was something else I had not thought about in years, a memory so small at the time that it seemed unimportant. And yet, looking back now, it feels like one of the clearest signs. When we were children, we had our own rituals, quiet games that made sense only to us. One winter afternoon, shortly after the first disappearance, a small group of us wandered near the edge of the forest, not deep enough to be forbidden, just far enough to feel secret. Someone had found an old wooden chest. Where it came from, none of us knew. It was small, weathered, and heavy for its size. We decided to bury it. It felt important, not exciting, not playful, but necessary, as if we were preserving something. We chose a tree that stood slightly apart from the others, tall, quiet, its branches curved inward, sheltering the ground beneath it. We dug slowly, our hands numbing in the cold soil. When the chest was placed inside, the forest felt attentive. Each of us placed something into it, a coin, a small toy, a folded piece of paper with a name written on it. I added a simple object, something insignificant, or so I thought at the time. We covered the chest and left without speaking. No promises were made, no instructions given. Years passed before I thought of it again. The memory returned unexpectedly during my university years, triggered by nothing more than the scent of damp earth after snowfall. That night, I dreamed of the tree. When I woke, I felt compelled to write it down. The chest, the objects, the place. I did not know why. Several weeks later, I received another letter. Inside, there was no message, only an object. It was one of the items we had buried, unchanged. I held it in my hands for a long time, trying to understand how it could exist here, now, after so many years. I told no one. That winter, I returned home. The forest looked the same. The tree stood where I remembered it. I dug where we had buried the chest. The earth was cold and heavy, resisting each movement. When I reached the spot, the chest was gone. In its place, I found something else. Objects I did not recognize. Items that felt out of time. A glove, worn but clean. A watch that did not tick. A photograph with faces blurred beyond recognition. I did not take them. I covered the place again and left. Later that night, another letter arrived at my childhood home. Some things passed through. I understood then that the forest did not only remember people, it remembered objects, intentions, moments. Perhaps the chest was never meant to be opened again. Perhaps it was an offering. Even now, I sometimes wonder how many things have crossed that boundary unnoticed. How many pieces of the past exist somewhere else, preserved in stillness? The forest does not return everything, but sometimes it reminds us. Quietly, there is a point in life when memories stop feeling distant and begin to feel present. Not loud, not intrusive, simply there. I reached that point quietly. By then, I had built a life far from the forest, a city, a routine, days shaped by schedules and responsibilities. And yet, every winter, something shifted. It wasn't nostalgia, it wasn't longing, it was recognition. I noticed how my body reacted to certain things before my mind did. The sound of snow against glass, the way silence deepens late at night, the feeling of standing alone beneath tall structures, buildings, trees, anything that stretches upward and disappears into darkness. I would pause without knowing why. Sometimes I would find myself standing at a window long after the room had grown cold, watching snowfall that reminded me of another place, another time. I never spoke about it, not because I was afraid of being misunderstood, but because the experience resisted language. Over the years, I noticed something else. Certain winters felt heavier than others. The air carried more stillness. Sounds softened earlier in the evening. Streets emptied faster. Those were the winters when the letters almost returned. Not physically, but in sensation. I would wake with phrases in my mind, half-formed, fading quickly if I tried to hold them. Some paths remain, not everything leaves. You have already crossed. I stopped questioning whether these thoughts were my own. Instead, I learned to sit with them. During those years, I began to walk more. Long walks at night, when the city quieted and the world felt less defined. Parks became my refuge. Trees do not change simply because they grow among concrete. They still listen. I would move slowly, letting my thoughts drift, allowing the rhythm of footsteps to replace intention. Sometimes, I would stop beneath a tree and feel a strange sense of familiarity, as if distance did not matter. Time, I realized, is not always linear. Some moments stretch forward, others fold back on themselves. The forest existed in one of those folds. I did not return to it physically for many years. I didn't need to. It lived quietly alongside me, in dreams, in pauses, in the spaces between thoughts. Once, during a particularly silent winter night, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. There was no subject line. The message contained only one sentence. Do you still avoid the paths? I deleted it, not out of fear, out of respect. Some questions are not meant to be answered quickly. As time passed, I noticed how easily people became lost, not just in forests, but in their own lives. Direction is a fragile thing. We rely on routines, signs, expectations. When those disappear, even briefly, the mind wanders. Perhaps that is what the forest offers. Not disappearance, but release. I often thought about the people who vanished, not with sorrow, not with curiosity, but with a quiet acceptance. Maybe they found something we are rarely allowed to notice, a space where time loosens its grip, where identity becomes lighter, where the world does not demand explanation. During one winter, I nearly returned. I stood on a train platform, ticket in hand, watching snow drift between lights. The idea felt neither urgent nor forbidden, simply available. In the end, I stayed where I was, not because I couldn't go, but because I understood that returning was not necessary. The forest does not require presence. It requires attention, and attention, once given, is never fully withdrawn. As the years continued, my life remained ordinary on the surface. Work, quiet evenings, long winters. But beneath it all, the memory stayed awake, patient. Like the forest itself, there is a moment in adulthood when we realize that not all choices are dramatic. Some are quiet, almost invisible. They arrive without urgency, without consequence that can be immediately measured. And yet, they shape everything that follows. I became aware of this slowly. Each winter, I felt myself standing closer to an invisible line, not physically, but inwardly. I noticed how easily my thoughts returned to the forest when the world grew quiet, how silence no longer felt empty, but full. In those moments, I understood something important. The forest never called out. It did not demand. It did not threaten. It simply existed. Much like certain memories, much like certain truths. During long winter evenings, I began to sit without distraction. No music, no screens. Just the sound of distant traffic fading into something softer, something closer to the rhythm of wind through branches. I allowed my thoughts to slow. At first, this felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable, but gradually, a different awareness emerged. I noticed how much of daily life is noise, constant direction, constant movement, constant expectation. The forest had offered none of that. It had offered stillness. And stillness, I realized, is rare. During one particularly cold winter, I took a walk late at night. Snow had begun to fall, light and steady. The city was quiet. I passed beneath streetlights that created small circles of illumination, each one briefly containing me before letting me go. For a moment, I imagined those lights as trees, tall, silent, watching. I felt no fear, only familiarity. I stopped walking and stood there, letting the snow collect on my coat. And I understood something I had not allowed myself to consider before. The forest did not take people away. It offered them a different way of being, a way that did not require constant identity, or explanation, or time as we understand it. Some accepted that offering, others did not. Neither choice was wrong. That night, I returned home and slept deeply. No dreams, no visions, just rest. In the years that followed, the memory of the forest softened further, not fading, settling. It became less a story and more a presence, something I carried quietly. Occasionally, I would hear of similar places, a remote village, a stretch of road, a lake surrounded by trees, always the same details. Disappearances without struggle, silence without explanation. witnesses who spoke carefully, if at all. I never felt compelled to investigate. Understanding does not always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. As another Christmas approached, many years after that first winter, I found myself reflecting not on what had happened, but on what had not. I had not gone back. I had not crossed the line again. And yet, I did not feel incomplete. The forest had already given me what it intended to give, a reminder that the world is larger than we perceive, that reality contains spaces we cannot fully map, and that we do not need to enter them to be changed by their existence. I still pause on Christmas Eve. I still listen. I still notice the way the world seems to slow. And sometimes, when the night is especially quiet, I feel that same attentive stillness. Not watching, waiting, not for me, but for anyone who happens to notice. And then, gently, I let the moment pass, because some paths remain open, not so that we may walk them, but so that we may know they exist. The forest stretches endlessly before us, not as a place on a map, but as a presence that exists beyond distance. Tall trees rise into the mist, their branches intertwining, creating patterns of shadow and pale winter light. Snow rests gently on every surface, softening the world, quieting it. There is no clear path here, and yet nothing feels lost. Each step, whether taken or imagined, reminds us how easily direction fades when urgency disappears. In the forest, there is no need to hurry. Time loosens its grip. Minutes pass like hours. Hours dissolve into something quieter. The mind wanders gently among the trees. Thoughts arrive, linger briefly, and drift away, like snowflakes melting as soon as they touch the ground. The forest listens without judgment. Wind moves through branches in slow, patient rhythms. Not speaking, but breathing. There is a pulse here, a steady presence that has existed long before us and will remain long after we are gone. Some call this silence, but it is more than that. It is attention, the kind that asks for nothing and expects nothing in return. As we move deeper, or perhaps simply remain still, the forest reveals its layers: moss-covered trunks, hidden clearings, shadows that shift softly as light filters through the canopy. Nothing sudden, nothing demanding, only gentle change. It is easy to imagine how someone might linger here, how a thought could stretch into a moment, how a moment could become a memory, how a memory could loosen its boundaries and drift elsewhere. The forest does not take, it receives. Breath slows, shoulders relax. The body remembers older rhythms, walking without destination, listening without expectation. In the distance, a branch bends beneath the weight of snow. The sound is faint, almost imagined, and yet it belongs. The forest holds countless stories, not written, not spoken, simply present. Some remain close to the surface, others sink deep, becoming part of the quiet structure beneath everything. We do not need to understand them. Understanding is not required here, only presence. The mind may drift to those who once walked among these trees, those who paused, those who listened. Perhaps they are still here, in some form we cannot easily recognize. Or perhaps they moved on, carrying the forest within them, just as we do now. Snow continues to fall, slowly, softly, each flake identical in its quiet purpose, covering paths, erasing urgency, returning the world to stillness. The forest does not mark time, it simply exists within it. Night deepens, shadows lengthen and soften. Stars are faint behind drifting clouds, their light filtered through branches and mist. Somewhere, an owl calls, distant, unhurried. The sound blends into the vast quiet. We are small here, and that is comforting. To be small is to be free from the need to control. The forest asks nothing of us. It allows us to rest, to observe without effort, to be present without purpose. Thoughts slow further. The boundary between imagination and memory thins. We may feel connected, not to something specific, but to the rhythm itself. Breath in, breath out. The forest remains, patient, unmoved. And as we linger in this quiet space, there is no fear, only calm awareness, only gentle curiosity, only rest. The forest stretches endlessly before us, and we do not need to go anywhere at all. The forest does not rush. It never has. Snow continues to fall, not in haste, but with quiet certainty. Each flake finds its place, resting briefly before becoming part of something larger. The ground softens beneath layers of white. Footprints fade almost as soon as they appear. Here, nothing insists on being remembered. And yet, nothing is truly lost. The trees stand close together, their trunks dark against the pale snow. Branches stretch outward, overlapping, forming natural arches that guide the eye upward and inward. The forest feels enclosed but not confined, protected. Breath becomes slower here. The body responds instinctively, matching the rhythm of the place. Muscles loosen, thoughts lengthen, drifting without urgency. The mind may wander to distant winters, to half-forgotten moments, to feelings without names. The forest accepts them all. Somewhere deep within the trees, snow slides gently from a branch. The sound is soft, almost imperceptible. It fades quickly, absorbed by the stillness. Silence here is not empty. It is layered. Beneath it lies the faint movement of wind, the slow creaking of wood adjusting to cold, the subtle awareness of space. These sounds do not interrupt the quiet. They belong to it. Time stretches further. The concept of before and after begins to soften. Moments lose their edges. The forest does not measure duration. It simply remains. If we walk, our steps are slow and deliberate. If we stand still, the world continues without us. Both are equally welcome. Snow gathers along fallen logs, smoothing sharp angles, returning everything to gentle forms. Even decay feels peaceful here. Nothing is wasted. Everything becomes part of the forest's long memory. The air is cold, but not harsh. It carries the clean scent of pine, earth, and frost. Each breath feels deeper than the last. The forest invites nothing, and yet it allows everything. It is easy to imagine staying here for a long time, not out of desire, not out of escape, simply because nothing asks us to leave. The darkness deepens slowly, like a curtain lowering without sound. Shapes soften further. Trees become silhouettes. Snow reflects what little light remains, keeping the forest from ever becoming truly dark. Somewhere, far away, a sound echoes briefly, a branch shifting, the distant call of a night bird. It fades without consequence. The forest does not respond. It does not need to. We may feel small here. That feeling is gentle, comforting. To be small is to be free from urgency, free from explanation, free from the need to decide. The forest holds space for stillness, and stillness holds space for rest. Thoughts continue to slow. Some dissolve entirely. Others repeat, soft and familiar, until they lose meaning and become sensation. Breath in, breath out. Snow continues to fall. The forest remains unchanged. It has witnessed countless winters, countless visitors. Some passed through briefly, others lingered longer. The forest does not distinguish. It does not judge. It simply exists. And in its presence, we are allowed to do the same. Nothing more is required. Nothing more is expected. The forest stretches endlessly, not forward, not backward, but inward. A place where time loosens, where thought softens, where rest becomes natural. And so we remain, listening, breathing, resting, as the quiet continues. And now, there's no need to walk any further. The forest remains, just as it always has, patient, silent, unchanging. We do not leave it behind. We simply allow it to rest where it belongs. Somewhere beyond this moment, trees stand quietly beneath falling snow. Branches bend softly. The night continues without urgency. But here, there is warmth, a steady glow, a familiar stillness. The world feels smaller now, not confined, but gentle. Breath slows, thoughts settle. Nothing needs to be remembered. Nothing needs to be understood. The forest does not fade. It simply becomes quiet within us. And as the sounds soften, as the night deepens, there is comfort in knowing that some places exist beyond explanation. Places that watch patiently. Places that wait. We have listened long enough. Now it is time to rest. The fire crackles softly. The warmth remains. And the night holds us gently, without questions.